form one of the most peculiar and striking moments of history. These 2 years rise like 2 mountains midway between those which precede and those which follow them. They have a revolutionary grandeur. Precipices are to be distinguished there. The social masses, the very assizes of civilization, the solid group of superposed and adhering interests, century-old profiles of the ancient French formation, appear and disappear in them every instant, athwart the storm clouds of systems, of passions, and of theory. These appearances and disappearances have been designated as movement and resistance. At intervals, truth, that daylight of the human soul, can be descried shining there. This remarkable epoch is decidedly circumscribed, and is beginning to be sufficiently distant from us to allow of our grasping the principal lines even at the present day. We shall make the attempt. The Restoration had been one of those intermediate phases hard to define, in which there is fatigue, buzzing, murmurs, sleep, tumults, and which are nothing else than the arrival of a great nation at a halting place. These epochs are peculiar and mislead the politicians who desire to convert them to profit. In the beginning, the nation asks nothing but repose. It thirsts for but one thing, peace. It has but one ambition, to be small, which is the translation of remaining tranquil. Of great events, great hazards, great adventures, great men, thank God, we have seen enough. We have them heaped higher than our heads. We would exchange Caesar for Prusias, and Napoleon for the King of Yvetot. What a good little king was he! We have marched since daybreak. We have reached the evening of a long and toilsome day. We have made our first change with Mirabeau, the second with Robespierre, the third with Bonaparte. We are worn out. Each one demands a bed. Devotion which is weary, heroism which has grown old, ambitions which are sated, fortunes which are made, seek, demand, implore, solicit what? A shelter. They have it. They take possession of peace, of tranquillity, of leisure. Behold, they are content. But at the same time certain facts arise, compel recognition, and knock at the door in their turn. These facts are the products of revolutions and wars. They exist, they have the right to install themselves in society, and they do install themselves therein. And most of the time, facts are the stewards of the household and fouriers who do nothing but prepare lodgings for principles. This, then, is what appears to philosophical politicians. At the same time that weary men demand repose, accomplished facts demand guarantees. Guarantees are the same to facts that repose is to men. This is what England demanded of the Stuarts after the Protector. This is what France demanded of the Bourbons after the Empire. These guarantees are a necessity of the times. They must be accorded. Princes grant them, but in reality it is the force of things which gives them. A profound truth, and one useful to know, which the Stuarts did not suspect in 1662, and which the Bourbons did not even obtain a glimpse of in 1814. The predestined family, which returned to France when Napoleon fell, had the fatal simplicity to believe that it was itself which bestowed, and that what it had bestowed it could take back again. The House of Bourbon possessed the right divine, that France possessed nothing, and that the political right conceded in the charter of Louis XVIII was merely a branch of the right divine, was detached by the House of Bourbon and graciously given to the people until such day as it should please the king to reassume it. Still the House of Bourbon should have felt, from the displeasure created by the gift, that it did not come from it. This house was churlish to the 19th century. It put on an ill-tempered look at every development of the nation. To make use of a trivial word, that is to say, of a popular and true word, it looked glum. The people saw this. It thought it possessed strength because the empire had been carried away before it like a theatrical stage setting. It did not perceive that it had itself been brought in the same fashion. It did not perceive that it also lay in that hand which had removed Napoleon. It thought that it had roots because it was the past. It was mistaken. It formed a part of the past, but the whole past was France. The roots of French society were not fixed in the Bourbons, but in the nation. These obscure and lively roots constituted not the right of a family, but the history of a people. They were everywhere, except under the throne. The House of Bourbon was to France the illustrious and bleeding knot in her history, but was no longer the principal element of her destiny and the necessary base of her politics. She could get along without the Bourbons. She had done without them for 22 years. There had been a break of continuity. They did not suspect the fact. And how should they have suspected it, they who fancied that Louis XVII reigned on the 9th of Thermidor, and that Louis XVIII was reigning at the Battle of Marengo? Never, since the origin of history, had princes been so blind in the presence of facts and the portion of divine authority, which facts contain and promulgate. Never had that pretension here below, which is called the right of kings, denied to such a point the right from on high. A capital error which led this family to lay its hand once more on the guarantees granted in 1814, on the concessions, as it termed them. Sad, a sad thing! What it had termed its concessions were our conquests. What it termed our encroachments were our rights. When the hour seemed to it to have come, the Restoration, supposing itself victorious over Bonaparte and well rooted in the country, that is to say, believing itself to be strong and deep, abruptly decided on its plan of action and risked its stroke. One morning it drew itself up before the face of France, and elevating its voice, it contested the collective title and the individual right of the nation to sovereignty, of the citizen to liberty. In other words, it denied to the nation that which made it a nation, and to the citizen that which made him a citizen. This is the foundation of those famous acts which are called the Ordinances of July. The Restoration fell. It fell justly, but, we admit, it had not been absolutely hostile to all forms of progress. Great things had been accomplished with it alongside. Under the Restoration, the nation had grown accustomed to calm discussion, which had been lacking under the Republic, and to grandeur and peace, which had been wanting under the Empire. France, free and strong, had offered an encouraging spectacle to the other peoples of Europe. The Revolution had had the word under Robespierre, the cannon had had the word under Bonaparte. It was under Louis XVIII and Charles X that it was the turn of intelligence to have the word. The wind ceased, and the torch was lighted once more. On the lofty heights the pure light of mind could be seen flickering. A magnificent, useful, and charming spectacle. For a space of 15 years, those great principles, which are so old for the thinker, so new for the statesman, could be seen at work in perfect peace on the public square. Equality before the law, liberty of conscience, liberty of speech, liberty of the press, the accessibility of all aptitudes to all functions. Thus it proceeded until 1830. The Bourbons were an instrument of civilization which broke in the hands of Providence. The fall of the Bourbons was full of grandeur, not on their side, but on the side of the nation. They quitted the throne with gravity, but without authority. Their descent into the night was not one of those solemn disappearances which leave a somber emotion in history. It was neither the spectral calm of Charles I nor the eagle scream of Napoleon. They departed, that is all. They laid down the crown and retained no aureole. They were worthy, but they were not august. They lacked, in a certain measure, the majesty of their misfortune. Charles X, during the voyage from Cherbourg, causing a round table to be cut over into a square table, appeared to be more anxious about imperiled etiquette than about the crumbling monarchy. This diminution saddened devoted men who loved their persons, and serious men who honored their race. The populace was admirable. The nation, attacked one morning with weapons by a sort of royal insurrection, felt itself in the possession of so much force that it did not go into a rage. It defended itself, restrained itself, restored things to their places, the government to law, the Bourbons to exile, alas, and then halted. It took the old king, Charles X, from beneath that dais which had sheltered Louis XIV, and set him gently on the ground. It touched the royal personages only with sadness and precaution. It was not one man, it was not a few men, it was France, France entire, France victorious and intoxicated with her victory, who seemed to be coming to herself, and who put into practice, before the eyes of the whole world, the grave words of Guillaume Duvert after the day of the barricades. It is easy, for those who are accustomed, to skim the favors of the great, and to spring like a bird from bough to bough, from an afflicted fortune to a flourishing one, to show themselves harsh towards their prince in his adversity. But as for me, the fortune of my kings, and especially of my afflicted kings, will always be venerable to me. The Bourbons carried away with them respect, but not regret. As we have just stated, their misfortune was greater than they were. They faded out in the horizon. The Revolution of July instantly had friends and enemies throughout the entire world. The first rushed towards her with joy and enthusiasm, the others turned away, each according to his nature. At the first blush, the princes of Europe, the owls of this dawn, shut their eyes, wounded and stupefied, and only opened them to threaten. A fright which can be comprehended, a wrath which can be pardoned. This strange revolution had hardly produced a shock. It had not even paid to vanquished royalty the honor of treating it as an enemy and of shedding its blood. In the eyes of despotic governments, who are always interested in having liberty calumniate itself, the Revolution of July committed the fault of being formidable and of remaining gentle. Nothing, however, was attempted or plotted against it. The most discontented, the most irritated, the most trembling saluted it. Whatever our egotism and our rancor may be, a mysterious respect springs from events in which we are sensible of the collaboration of someone who is working above man. The Revolution of July is the triumph of right overthrowing the fact, a thing which is full of splendor. Right overthrowing the fact, hence the brilliancy of the Revolution of 1830, hence also its mildness. Right triumphant has no need of being violent. Right is the just and the true. The property of right is to remain eternally beautiful and pure. The fact, even when most necessary to all appearances, even when most thoroughly accepted by contemporaries, if it exists only as a fact, and if it contain only too little of right or none at all, is infallibly destined to become, in the course of time, deformed, impure, perhaps even monstrous. If one desires to learn at one blow to what degree of hideousness the fact can attain, viewed at the distance of centuries, let him look at Machiavelli. Machiavelli is not an evil genius, nor a demon, nor a miserable and cowardly writer. He is nothing but the fact. And he is not only the Italian fact, he is the European fact, the fact of the 16th century. He seems hideous, and so he is, in the presence of the moral idea of the 90s. This conflict of right and fact has been going on ever since the origin of society. To terminate this duel, to amalgamate the pure idea with the humane reality, to cause right to penetrate pacifically into the fact, and the fact into the right, that is the task of sages. End of Book 1, Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Book 1 of Les Miserables, Volume 4 by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Emma Joyce. Les Miserables, Volume 4 by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hatgood. Book 1, A Few Pages of History. Chapter 2, Badly Sewed. But the task of sages is one thing, the task of clever men is another. The Revolution of 1830 came to a sudden halt. As soon as a revolution has made the coast, the skillful make haste to prepare the shipwreck. The skillful in our century have conferred on themselves the title of statesmen, so that this word, statesman, has ended by becoming somewhat of a slang word. It must be borne in mind, in fact, that wherever there is nothing but skill, there is necessarily pettiness. To say the skillful amounts to saying the mediocre. In the same way, to say statesmen is sometimes equivalent to saying traitors. If, then, we are to believe the skillful, revolutions like the Revolution of July are severed arteries, a prompt ligature is indispensable. The right, too grandly proclaimed, is shaken. Also, right once firmly fixed, the state must be strengthened. Liberty once assured, attention must be directed to power. Here the sages are not, as yet, separated from the skillful, but they begin to be distrustful. Power, very good, but in the first place, what is power? In the second, whence comes it? The skillful do not seem to hear the murmured objection, and they continue their maneuvers. According to the politicians, who are ingenious in putting the mask of necessity on profitable fictions, the first requirement of a people after a revolution, when this people forms part of a monarchical continent, is to procure for itself a dynasty. In this way, they say, peace, that is to say, time to dress our wounds and to repair the house, can be had after a revolution. The dynasty conceals the scaffolding and covers the ambulance. Now, it is not always easy to procure a dynasty. If it is absolutely necessary, the first man of genius, or even the first man of fortune who comes to hand, suffices for the manufacturing of a king. You have, in the first place, Napoleon. in the second Iturbide. But the first family that comes to hand does not suffice to make a dynasty. There is necessarily required a certain modicum of antiquity in a race, and the wrinkle of the centuries cannot be improvised. If we place ourselves at the point of view of the statesman, after making all allowances, of course, after a revolution, what are the qualities of a king which result from it? He may be, and it is useful for him to be, a revolutionary, that is to say, a participant in his own person in that revolution, that he should have lent a hand to it, that he should have either compromised or distinguished himself therein, that he should have touched the axe or wielded the sword in it. What are the qualities of a dynasty? It should be national, that is to say, revolutionary at a distance, not through acts committed, but by reason of ideas accepted. It should be composed of past and be historic, be composed of future and be sympathetic. All this explains why the early revolutions contented themselves with finding a man, Cromwell or Napoleon, and why the second absolutely insisted on finding a family, the House of Brunswick or the House of Orleans. Royal houses resemble those Indian fig trees, each branch of which, bending over to the earth, takes root and becomes a fig tree itself. Each branch may become a dynasty, on the sole condition that it shall bend down to the people. Such is the theory of the skilful. Here, then, lies the great art, to make a little render to success the sound of a catastrophe, in order that those who profit by it may tremble from it also, to season with fear every step that is taken, to augment the curve of the transition to the point of retarding progress, to dull that aurora, to denounce and retrench the harshness of enthusiasm, to cut all angles and nails, to wad triumph, to muffle up right, to envelope the giant people in flannel and to put it to bed very speedily, to impose a diet on that excess of health, to put Hercules on the treatment of a convalescent, to dilute the event with the expedient, to offer to spirits thirsting for the ideal that nectar thinned out with a potion, to take one's precaution against too much success, to garnish the revolution with a shade. 1830 practiced this theory, already applied to England by 1688. 1830 is a revolution arrested midway, half of progress, quasi-right. Now logic knows not the almost, absolutely as the sun knows not the candle. Who arrests revolutions halfway? The bourgeoisie. Why? Because the bourgeoisie is interest which has reached satisfaction. Yesterday it was appetite, today it is plenitude, tomorrow it will be satiety. The phenomenon of 1814 after Napoleon was reproduced in 1830 after Charles X. The attempt has been made, and wrongly, to make a class of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie is simply the contented portion of the people. The bourgeois is the man who now has time to sit down. A chair is not a cask. But through a desire to sit down too soon, one may arrest the very march of the human race. This has often been the fault of the bourgeoisie. One is not a class because one has committed a fault. Selfishness is not one of the divisions of the social order. Moreover, we must be just to selfishness. The state to which that part of the nation which is called the bourgeoisie aspired after the shock of 1830 was not the inertia which is complicated with indifference and laziness, and which contains a little shame. It was not the slumber which presupposes a momentary forgetfulness accessible to dreams. It was the halt. The halt is a word formed of a singular, double, and almost contradictory sense. A troop on the march, that is to say movement. A stand, that is to say repose. The halt is the restoration of forces. It is repose armed and on the alert. It is the accomplished fact which posts sentinels and holds itself on its guard. The halt presupposes the combat of yesterday and the combat of tomorrow. It is the partition between 1830 and 1848. What we here call combat may also be designated as progress. The bourgeoisie, then, as well as the statesman, required a man who should express this word halt, and although because, a composite individuality, signifying revolution and signifying stability, in other terms strengthening the present by the evident compatibility of the past with the future. This man was already found. His name was Louis Philippe d'Orléans. The 221 made Louis Philippe king. Lafayette undertook the coronation. He called it the best of republics. The town hall of Paris took the place of the cathedral of Rheims. This substitution of a half-throne for a whole throne was the work of 1830. When the skillful had finished, the immense vice of their solution became apparent. All this had been accomplished outside the bounds of absolute right. Absolute right cried, "I protest!" Then, terrible to say, it retired into the darkness. End of Book 1, Chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of Book 1 of Les Miserables, Volume 4, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rachel Weaver. Les Miserables, Volume 4, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 1, A Few Pages of History. Chapter 3, Louis Philippe. Revolutions have a terrible arm and a happy hand. They strike firmly and choose well. Even incomplete, even debased and abused, and reduced to their state of a junior revolution, like the Revolution of 1830, they nearly always retain sufficient providential lucidity to prevent them from falling amiss. Their eclipse is never an abdication. Nevertheless, let us not boast too loudly. Revolutions also may be deceived, and grave errors have been seen. Let us return to 1830. 1830, in its deviation, had good luck. In the establishment which entitled itself order after the revolution had been cut short, the king amounted to more than royalty. Louis Philippe was a rare man. The son of a father to whom history will accord certain attenuating circumstances, but also as worthy of esteem as that father had been of blame. Possessing all private virtues and many public virtues, careful of his health, of his fortune, of his person, of his affairs, knowing the value of a minute and not always the value of a year, sober, serene, peaceable, patient, a good man and a good prince, sleeping with his wife, and having in his palace lackeys charged with the duty of showing the conjugal bed to the bourgeois, an ostentation of a regular sleeping apartment, which had become useful after the former illegitimate displays of the elder branch, knowing all the languages of Europe, and, what is more rare, all the languages of all interests, and speaking them. An admirable representative of the middle class, but outstripping it, and in every way greater than it, possessing excellent sense, while appreciating the blood from which he had sprung, counting most of all on his intrinsic worth, and on the question of his race very particular, declaring himself Orleans and not Bourbon. Thoroughly the first prince of the blood royal, while he was still only a serene highness, but a frank bourgeois from the day he became king. Diffuse in public, concise in private, reputed but not proved to be a miser. At bottom, one of those economists who are readily prodigal at their own fancy or duty. Lettered, but not very sensitive to letters. A gentleman, but not a chevalier. Simple, calm, and strong, adored by his family and his household. A fascinating talker, an undeceived statesman, inwardly cold, dominated by immediate interest, always governing at the shortest range, incapable of rancor and gratitude, making use without mercy of superiority on mediocrity, clever in getting parliamentary majorities to put in the wrong those mysterious unanimities which mattered duly under thrones, unreserved, sometimes imprudent in his lack of reserve, but with marvelous address in that imprudence, fertile in expedients, in countenances, in masks, making France fear Europe, and Europe France, incontestably fond of his country, but preferring his family, assuming more domination than authority, and more authority than dignity, a disposition which has this unfortunate property, that, as it turns everything into success, it admits of ruse and does not absolutely repudiate baseness, but which has this valuable side, that it preserves politics from violent shocks, the state from fractures, and society from catastrophes. Minute, correct, vigilant, attentive, sagacious, indefatigable, contradicting himself at times and giving himself the lie, bold against Austria and Ancona, obstinate against England in Spain, bombarding Antwerp and paying off Pritchard, signing the Marseillais with conviction, inaccessible to despondency, to lassitude, to the taste for the beautiful and the ideal, to daring generosity, to utopia, to chimeras, to wrath, to vanity, to fear, possessing all the forms of personal intrepidity, a general at Valmy, a soldier at Jemappes, attacked 8 times by regicide, and always smiling, brave as a grenadier, courageous as a thinker, uneasy only in the face of the chances of a European shaking up, and unfitted for great political adventures, always ready to risk his life, never his work, distinguishing his will and influence in order that he might be obeyed as an intelligence rather than as a king, endowed with observation and not with divination, not very attentive to minds, but knowing men, that is to say, requiring to see in order to judge, prompt and penetrating good sense, practical wisdom, easy speech, prodigious memory, drawing incessantly on this memory, his only point of resemblance with Caesar, Alexander, and Napoleon, knowing deeds, facts, details, dates, proper names, ignorant of tendencies, passions, the diverse geniuses of the crowd, the interior aspirations, the hidden and obscure uprisings of souls, in a word, all that can be designated as the invisible currents of consciences, accepted by the surface, but little in accord with France lower down, extricating himself by dint of tact, governing too much and not enough, his own first minister, excellent at creating out of the pettiness of realities an obstacle to the immensity of ideas, mingling a genuine creative faculty of civilization, of order and organization, an indescribable spirit of proceedings and chicanery, the founder and lawyer of a dynasty, having something of Charlemagne and something of an attorney, in short, a lofty and original figure, a prince who understood how to create authority in spite of the uneasiness of France, and power in spite of the jealousy of Europe. Louis Philippe will be classed among the eminent men of his century, and would be ranked among the most illustrious governors of history, had he loved glory but a little, and if he had had the sentiment of what is great to the same degree as the feeling for what is useful. Louis Philippe had been handsome, and in his old age he remained graceful. Not always approved by the nation, he always was so by the masses. He pleased. He had that gift of charming. He lacked majesty. He wore no crown, although a king, and no white hair, although an old man. His manners belonged to the old regime, and his habits to the new, a mixture of the noble and the bourgeois which suited 1830. Louis Philippe was transition reigning. He had preserved the ancient pronunciation and the ancient orthography, which he placed at the service of opinions modern. He loved Poland and Hungary, but he wrote les Polonais, and he pronounced les Hongrais. He wore the uniform of the National Guard, like Charles X, and the ribbon of the Legion of Honor, like Napoleon. He went a little to chapel, not at all to the chase, never to the opera, incorruptible by sacristans, by worshippers in, by ballet dancers. This made a part of his bourgeois popularity. He had no heart. He went out with his umbrella under his arm, and this umbrella long formed a part of his aureole. He was a bit of a mason, a bit of a gardener, something of a doctor. He bled a postilion who had tumbled from his horse. Louis Philippe no more went about without his lancet than did Henry IV without his poniard. The royalists jeered at this ridiculous king, the first who had ever shed blood without the object of healing. For the grievances against Louis Philippe, there is one deduction to be made. There is that which accuses the royalty, that which accuses the reign, that which accuses the king. 3 columns which all give different totals. Democratic right confiscated, progress becomes a matter of secondary interest. The protests of the street violently repressed. Military execution of insurrections. The rising passed over by arms. The Rue Transonienne, the councils of war, the absorption of the real country by the legal country, on half-shares with 300,000 privileged persons. These are the deeds of royalty. Belgium refused, Algeria too harshly conquered, and, as in the case of India by the English, with more barbarism than civilization. The breach of faith to Abd el-Kader, Blayais, Deutsch bought, Pritchard paid. These are the doings of the reign. The policy which was more domestic than national was the doing of the king. As will be seen, the proper deduction having been made, the king's charge is decreased. This is his great fault. He was modest in the name of France. Whence arises this fault? We will state it. Louis Philippe was rather too much of a paternal king. That incubation of a family with the objection of founding a dynasty is afraid of everything and does not like to be disturbed.